it. Great. I think I'll get there, but good to see you all again. I know I wasn't with y'all last month. I was on PTO, but happy to be back. Let's see if I can get this to move forward. So the agenda doesn't look too different today, but we do have a different approach for the sort of engagement activity, which I think I would say has been more fun, subjectively, at least, maybe objectively. We shall see. So yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Hopefully you had a chance to review the landscape analysis. We'll move quickly through those slides, but happy to stop and chat about anything if you had specific questions. The district versus regional takeaways. So kind of adjusted the approach here. If you had a chance, we did send out the whole presentation to try to give everybody a chance to look through it all in advance, prepare questions. But we realized that looking at one region in isolation isn't always the most helpful approach, and it can be hard to understand how that compares to the rest. So what we've done here is just showing all the regions kind of simultaneously, and then within that district-wide view. So then the small group work and the sort of final steps with the community insights questions, and then we've got the survey links here as well if you want to take that while it's fresh on your mind, and just making sure we get people's participation on that. So quickly on admin items, just kind of as I was talking about, just items that have been added. So a couple things on the Google Drive. We had a couple other steering committee members who have pushed out the links that we've been sending to, I think somebody had shared with the teachers union in the East region, which is great. So if there are folks that you want to share with and the links, weren't previously like the one pagers, I think were only in the steering committee folders, that's all visible to anybody now. It's like anyone with the link can view on Google. So please share. The only thing that we pulled out of there was the contact list that has all your emails on it, so that people don't bother you, which you all have access to, but that is just one parent folder up. So as always, if you have any issues with the Google Drive, please let us know. We want to make sure that you have access to everything, and please feel free to share everything far and wide. So a couple other things we've thrown in there. So that spreadsheet that you have printed out, the digital version's in there, annual utility report. So that is just utility consumption by building. If you're curious which buildings are, more of an energy hog than others or more energy efficient than others, you can start to look at some of that data from the last fiscal year, as well as the budget prep guide. So this is something that Nick Sinram had talked about in that enrollment and budgeting meeting, just about how principals put together their budgets every year. So it's like a 17-page PDF. It's very thorough and got a lot of information in there if you're interested, just about like staffing and everything else. So moving on to the feedback summary. So this is just from the community insights forum. So again, we had about 32 people respond in the last month. And Northwest, not to make it a contest, but was in second place with 8 responses. East region had 19, but so a lot of the responses were kind of similar for the first couple questions. So we just kind of combined them all to make sure that we're painting that full picture of what we're hearing. So things that, they would like the committee to consider, the respondents, is just as we talk about resource consolidation and allocation, making that a priority and also being really transparent about how it's being done. So that's something I was hoping to speak to when we had the larger group, but let me get to the next one quick. But school start times came up a lot as it relates to transportation. So really helpful to see the impact that has for folks. The next one is just questions the committee to address. So details about right sizing, when will that be finalized? And then athletic facilities came up a couple times, and just thinking about not just gyms, but like fields and outdoor amenities as well. So what I was gonna say on these 2 items and just responding to some of those questions is, this is kind of the last meeting we're having where it's really like this foundational knowledge piece, right? And making sure that we all have this shared understanding. In the next meeting, as we get into sort of the peer district, like what are other districts doing to approach these challenges, we also really want to shift the conversation to what is MPS going to do, right? And like, how do we put all this knowledge into practice, into action? So, at the next meeting, we will also start out with kind of a reminder of here's where we are in the timeline. But, it's important that as we think about, you know, the goals that we set out with, in terms of right sizing, but generally just like supporting students, that we are tying this work back to that. And so I think we just wanted to speak high level to the fact that like, that is what we're hoping to do today. You'll see with the hands-on activity, we're starting to get into that prioritization piece a little bit more in terms of trying to figure out, you know, what are the higher priorities, as we look at that and really start to come up with some concrete plans that we can have people react to as well. Easier than just saying like, what do you think about transportation? Or what do you think about, you know, because it's hard to answer those questions in a vacuum. So any questions or points of clarification on that?
Aren't the June and July are virtual meetings, though, correct?
July and August are virtual meetings.
Okay,
We are thinking of shifting June just because the second week runs into like the last week of school, and we understand that that'll be a busy time for people. So we're looking at a creative solution, but it'd still be, if anything, it should be easier to attend a meeting. Yeah, we'll still plan to be in person next month. So, sorry to be murky on that. We just haven't put a pin in everything.
I just didn't know.
No, it's a great question. So yeah, July and August, we're planning to be fully virtual, and then back in September. So the last point on here too, with specialty programs was one of the questions. So definitely heard from folks about, you know, supporting, expanding, arts programs, AP programs, Montessori, tutoring programs, and then some of the conversations that had come up in previous, you know, meetings with the steering committees about how do we get more specialty programming into non-specialty schools and start to increase access through that. So world languages was a big one, but really trying to be thoughtful about that approach. The next piece that we broke out separately here is just transportation. So actually some interesting takeaways. I mean, keep in mind it's a smaller sample size, you know, 29 responses, but this first question, and these are the questions that you all had sort of submitted and voted on, is how important is transportation when choosing a school? So pretty even split. Blue is very important. Red is somewhat important, and orange is not important. So you see that blue is kind of leading, but pretty close. And then on the second question here, so if your child's school stopped offering bus service, what would you do? Switch to a different school that still had busing, stay at the school that, you know, and not use MPS transportation, or switch to a better fitting MPS school without MPS transportation as well. And the overwhelming answer was to stay at the current school without MPS transportation, which generally any response that's that strong in any form or fashion, I think would be interesting data, but certainly something interesting to sort of pull at. And it's worth noting that that question was actually submitted by Owen, the student that we have here too, who's participating. So glad he's there. And it's just another reminder, like as we get into, you know, having that more concrete sort of potential plans and things to look at, like getting that engagement piece really rolling so that people have something to sort of weigh in on and react to. Cool, all right. I will move through the landscape analysis relatively quickly, assuming that you all have had a chance to look at it. If there are points you want to touch on, please do stop me and let me know. So starting out with just the age of buildings. Buildings are old, the decades they were built in. This is the table we've broken out by region as well later on. But average age about 82, 83 years, 85% built before 1970. So when comparing that to the national averages, 50 years on average, about 40% built before 1970. So definitely older than the average bear. And then just looking at the, you know, work or lack thereof that has happened with a lot of public schools across the US. So knowing that less than half of them have gotten major renovations or been replaced outright, and less than a third have had major work done in the last 15 years. So this is certainly, you know, a widespread sort of challenge that a lot of districts are facing with older building stock. So digging into like different conditions and offerings within buildings, we know air conditioning is always top of mind, especially as things start to heat up. So while more than half of MPS schools have air conditioning at some level, only about 25% of classrooms are air conditioned across the district, which we think is the most important space to really shine a light on. So I wanted to look at it from that angle. This chart I know is a little bit harder to read if you haven't had a chance to look at it, but what this is showing is just kind of how the climate shifts, what is projected to happen from that standpoint. So our sustainability team in-house at Perkins Eastman actually put this together for Milwaukee. So this is pulling off weather data around the airport, I believe. Now being 2025, that top graph is just showing the outdoor air temperature across the calendar year, January all the way to December. You can see between May and September, those warmer summer months, and just how that heat stress is expanding as you look at these different timelines. And then the bottom chart is showing the thermal comfort. So that's the inside of the building and how much energy is required to keep a building comfortable. The white area is when a building is perfectly comfortable, right? Like when you have that low 70s air and you could in theory keep windows open and everything would be very comfortable temperature. And then the red is showing when cooling would be required, so air conditioning, and then blue when heating is required. So you can see how that red is growing and bleeding into like these September and May months, in those later years. So just highlighting the importance of thinking about air conditioning as we move forward and are looking for, the right sort of solutions for the future of MPS school buildings. Again, nationally, this is a challenge that's increasing. So this is really meant to, this is a 4-year-old report that is projecting into this current year. So this is a projection, it's not exact data, but the orange areas are counties that would need air conditioning by this year, based on the assessment that 32 or more school days where the outdoor air temperature is at least 80 degrees. So while Wisconsin doesn't have that orange yet, it's all relative. That is not to say that it doesn't need it. One could argue that 30 school days at or above 80 degrees is still a lot and is still really uncomfortable for kids. But this is just showing, the widespread impact and need that is there. Accessibility is a big one. So especially when you're dealing with older buildings, a lot of them weren't designed in a way that is ADA accessible, wheelchair accessible. However, we know that, and there are projects that can be done after the fact, but about 8 out of every 10 MPS schools are accessible for wheelchair access, and then lower numbers on elementary and K8 just because there are a much larger amount of those buildings generally. When you look at that at a national scale, so this graph is just kind of showing all the different sort of challenges that can exist on that pathway into a school building. And so the GAO surveyed, a sample of 55 schools across 6 states, but I think what's notable is, they surveyed even more schools, and almost 1 out of every 5 that they surveyed districts had at least one school where some kids would not be able to attend due to accessibility issues. So another big challenge, and knowing that ADA is nuanced and getting in the building is only a portion of the ADA challenge, and like being able to get to all floors and use restrooms, etc. So a lot to unpack there. Safety and security, we know, is a big one for a lot of folks and always on top of people's minds, but this is showing just over those a 10-year span, kind of the changes that happen. So security cameras jumping up from like 60% to over 90%. Threat reporting systems, and then this one that had no data from 2009-10 was locks on classroom doors. It's because they didn't survey it that year, not because it went from 0 to 60 or 70 or whatever, but certainly something that is top of mind for folks. When you think about security, it's easy to think about like making the most secure building possible when you have an intruder situation or something like that. Which is very real, but it's also important to strike that balance between not turning a school into a bunker. And, how do you make sure that you do have that sort of balanced safety approach? So the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey in 2017 is showing that, the highest student concerns for safety were actually about bullying and mental health issues. Weapons was down here at the end, still a very valid concern, but knowing that it is a lot of things that need to be thought about, especially when considering design and, making sure that you're trying to thread that needle. So lead exposure risk. So, there's a lot of information out there right now. So wanted to at least provide a high level overview, but happy to, answer any questions or dig in if there are specific wonderings, but just highlighting the 9 schools that were identified as actionable that had temporary closures, some of which have reopened, and then the lead action plan that is about the schools being inspected before the start of the next school year and another 52 before the end of the calendar year. Noting the CDC challenges, calling for K-12 facility funding, there's a lot there. It's important to consider that in a larger context. Lead is not just a challenge for MPS buildings, it is a large challenge in the city of Milwaukee. Almost 90% of the residential homes were built before 1978, meaning there is a high likelihood that they have lead paint in them somewhere. It is very common for it to be, covered up over and over again, but it is there and it becomes a problem, right? Like once it chips and dusts and goes into that. So when you consider rental units and knowing that more than half of Milwaukee residents are renting 200,000 units that likely contain lead paint, and the cost to remediate in the sense of actually removing the lead paint would be $50,000 per unit, which is why looking at, sort of safe encapsulation, which is also considered a form of abatement, is oftentimes a more pragmatic solution. And then at the bottom, just noting that, federal funding had been earmarked a few years ago for abating lead in low-income community homes, but that funding is due to run out at the end of the next calendar year. And then we'll return to a lower rate, assuming there are no further cuts, which is hard to assume much these days. And then just kind of looking nationwide, there's a good Journal Sentinel article that highlighted some of the other districts that were dealing with these challenges, which we were going to touch on here anyway. And so CPS being obviously a nearby one, a couple summers ago, undertook a large effort to remove lead paint from 80 of its schools. New York City has been dealing with this for many years. Obviously the magnitude of that district is huge. When you see like 900 classrooms or 300, school buildings is out of the 1,000 plus that they have. So it's a really large district, but also a really large challenge for them to face. So knowing that that does sort of exist all over and that there aren't federal mandates about inspections and only a small handful of states are actually requiring districts to do something. From there, this actually I think is the most interesting one if I were to opine, but GAO did a survey in 2017 and found that nearly 90% of school districts either didn't inspect for lead or didn't know whether they had in the last year. These are school districts that specifically had buildings built before 1978, so who would have had a reason to do so. Of the 12% that did, over half of them found lead in buildings, and only 6% of the districts that were surveyed actually had a plan for recurring inspections. It is certainly a larger issue. So drawing back to kind of the why, I think we could have an entire separate meeting about this, but wanting to at least touch on it briefly is just, the impact of a built learning environment on students and student outcomes. So going from left to right, there was actually a report from 2001 that was about Milwaukee Public Schools and where they looked at facility conditions compared to student test scores. And there's certainly room for discussion around whether test scores are the right metrics and things like that, but there was a correlation between those items. The second report here is from the Harvard School of Public Health, put out during COVID, that just like the impact of a healthy building on student success. And it's sort of a meta-analysis of a ton of different research resources sort of pulled into one. So all of these are linked at the bottom. We'll try to add them to the shared resource library as well, but you should be able to on the PDF just get access to any of these. And then the last one is a large research effort that our firm undertook actually with the Drexel School of Education and Baltimore City Public Schools and DC Public Schools, showing the impact of a modernized building on student outcomes compared to non-modernized buildings. So doing that study and not just on student outcomes, but community engagement and a whole host of different metrics. And so very biased, obviously, but I think it's worth looking through and really helpful in just sort of understanding the impacts there. So money is obviously a big piece of any of this, right? Like as we're thinking about trying to address some of these issues, where does money come from? Just highlighting how MPS's funding works and where the revenue is coming from, 20% coming from the Fed, which is not the highest in Wisconsin. That is what this chart is showing. But when you consider the size of the district, it is by far the largest sum of money, or a district receiving the largest sum of money from the Fed, so that is worth considering at 20%. This is just how the MPS budget is broken out, pulled directly from it. I won't go through each line item here, but just seeing that sort of $1.5 billion budget for the year school year 24-25. And then digging into sort of comparative expenditures, so how MPS spends its money related to facilities compared to other districts in the state, as well as the nationwide averages of district spending. So on the left, you're seeing operational costs for buildings. So operations and maintenance is pretty much anything that is the general upkeep of buildings, as well as like minor repairs, things like that. General maintenance, so a little bit below average there, but still, you know, a significant amount. And so in the yellow is Wisconsin, and green is the national average, and then the capital expenditures, which is major renovations, new constructions, construction, things of that nature. Really substantial difference with 1.3% of the MPS budget going there compared to 10 and above for the state and district nationwide averages. So thinking about age of the buildings and everything else, you start to understand kind of where this is coming from. One of the questions that came up at a previous steering committee meeting was just whether how much this number fluctuates, like this percentage. And obviously we don't have that data showing here, but generally speaking, it is significantly lower. I think it is actually, Michelle, keep me honest here, but it's higher this year than it has been.
Yeah, so this budget year, they did allocate us about 18 million, and kind of a fun fact, we need about 3 million just to kind of keep the doors open with like required testing of fire alarms and elevators and, you know, things like that. So every year, you know, we need to spend about that much on just the regulatory things. So the rest we were able to do a few roofs and a couple of other projects, fire alarm.
So just to try to help paint the why, and as we look at that comparative funding, worth noting that Wisconsin is one of 12 states that does not provide capital funding to districts at the state level. So there are a few that did not respond, but as you can see, the majority of states do provide that in some form or fashion. It is different everywhere. State education agencies often tie it to initiatives that they have and what they'd like to see in a standardized sense, but that certainly makes it challenging for states like Wisconsin, Michigan, to go out at the local level and go after funding to support capital needs. Last but not least, touching on just funding trends from a capital standpoint. So when we talk about school bonds, that is, you know, all school bonds are referendums, not all referendums are school bonds. The last two referendums MPS has done have been operational referendums. So when you're talking about a bond that is for capital expenditure specifically, you'll see that these numbers have been going up significantly in the last couple of years, especially. So a 39% jump of pursued money in 2024, that last election cycle. Generally, it goes up more when there is a presidential election. You'll see that this climbed a little bit from the previous year, just because more people are voting, but with ESSER funding winding down, which if you're not familiar is like that COVID sort of response funding, more districts are pursuing funds there. In the April election here, 31 school bond pursuits happened in Wisconsin, 21 of which were successful, were passed, and MPS has not actually proposed a school bond referendum since 1993. They went after 366 million, which is 815 million in today dollars, which was soundly projected 75% of the vote against. So
I was back in '93.
yeah, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
But any questions on any of that? No, there's a lot of content there. Okay. So digging into the district versus regional analysis. So looking at year of construction, just highlighting when buildings are built, what decade. So breaking out by region, you can kind of see Northwest, like many, the district overall really spiked through the 50s, 60s, and 70s when a lot of buildings were being built. But that is definitely when the majority of the Northwest schools came into being. And then we also wanted to dig into and look at additions. We know that plays a big part as well. So doing, sort of major construction efforts by adding on to buildings. This is just showing quantity, so the count of additions. It's important to note not all additions are created equal. Adding a wing of 12 classrooms is not the same thing as adding 2 classrooms, right? And those would both be considered additions here. But we wanted to at least show kind of when those were spiking more so and how they've carried out over the years. So Northwest has received the most from a quantity standpoint of the additions that were built. And I think it's like 121 or something total. Anybody wants to do quick math, but from there, just looking at FCI. So if you're not familiar with FCI, it's basically taking the cost of the deferred maintenance of the building divided by the replacement value of that building. So trying to create a metric to, sort of understand the health of the building and the condition that it's in. So although MPS buildings are older, like a lot of them are in decent condition, it is worth noting that this metric is not without flaw. It doesn't take, not all FCI scores are equal. A building that has an HVAC system, air conditioning, is going to have a higher cost to it, higher cost to operate, higher cost for replacement, deferred maintenance, all those things come into play. Which is why when you look at that big spreadsheet, you won't see FCI on there. We have this composite building score, which is balancing FCI with air conditioning status, which we believe is also important, obviously, and then energy use intensity, so just how much energy a building uses year over year. What we're trying to do is, a lot of times you will have schools with air conditioning have a worse FCI score because they have air conditioning and have higher costs associated with the building. So a school without air conditioning might have an overinflated good quality. Hopefully that makes sense. And then it doesn't also take into consideration furniture, equipment, technology, all those other critical pieces within a building. From there, just again, wanting to touch on outdoor amenities, we know that athletic amenities came up earlier. So this is just showing, when we started this project, we did do site visits at every school and just looking at what the different outdoor amenities were by region. So who has tennis courts, soccer fields, softball, football, volleyball, and just seeing where those differences are. You can see like Southwest region is sort of popping up with track, football, softball, soccer, tennis courts having a higher percentage of those that exist. And, not necessarily to say one specific thing on this, but just to show another piece of information that we can look at as we're trying to prioritize schools or balance offerings in the district.
Sure.
No, yeah, utilization is the last thing we'll touch on here. But hopefully you've seen these before. This is on the website and we've talked about it a lot. It gets talked about a lot in any district that's dealing with enrollment challenges, but that is just enrollment over capacity. So how many kids are enrolled at a building versus how many could fit from a programmatic standpoint. And that, about a quarter of the district is over capacity and a quarter is very far beneath it. And just by school type there, middle school is at the lowest on average utilization wise. So when you break that out by region, you can see sort of that even split, almost a quarter in each one. And you can see that Northwest has the majority sort of falling in this low category, which I believe is between or it is beneath between 51 and 75% capacity. So that is where Northwest falls, and we've broken them out into separate donut charts for each one to try to highlight that. So you can see the East region is kind of divided up similarly to how the whole district looks, with about a quarter in each one. Central region has about half of their schools that are below 50% utilization, and then Southwest has 50% that are above 101 or 101 and above. Now, it's worth noting that these numbers are also things where it's like, are these the right metrics? Is 101 and above the right marking point to say that is what should be considered high? There is room for ebb and flow there, and that's definitely, we want to hear that from you. If you please challenge these assumptions on these things. We want to know your thoughts on them, but it doesn't have to happen right now. We just want to put it out there. And last but not least is just building area to enrollment. So we know that scatter plots can be kind of a pain to read sometimes. So put this slide here just to explain how we're sort of displaying the information. So this black trend line that you're seeing here is showing 150 square feet per student. And so that is sort of, there is not a nationwide standard that is widely acknowledged as the right amount of square feet per student in a school. But generally speaking, and regionally looking at projects in Wisconsin and Minnesota, 150 square feet per elementary school student, 180 square feet per middle school student, and 230 for a high school student are like broadly accepted numbers for like new construction. That's like where you would want to aim, but it is a range. Some people think it should be higher, some people think it should be lower. But we wanted to give an idea just showing where MPS schools fall on that right now. So what you're seeing on the x-axis here is enrollment. So that's, you know, how many kids are enrolled at that school, and then square footage on the y vertical axis there. So all the schools that are above the line are schools that have more than 150 square feet per student. The schools that are below are the ones that have less. So in theory, these would be more crowded buildings. So as we dig into that, you'll see with elementary schools kind of spread out. You see a couple of Northwest schools that are below the line where they are more crowded. And then you have some, obviously, most of them that are scattered above, or a majority at least, and one that's very standout. So I should look this up at this point because I keep talking about it, but I don't know what school that is. It is 200,000 square feet and has about 400 kids in it. So that is an example of a school that is very large, but relatively fewer students. 400 is not necessarily a small enrollment, but just to highlight how that looks. So with K-8s, there's not a surefire number there, so we put elementary and middle school numbers. You can see that there are more of the K-8 schools that are below those lines, so that are generally more crowded across different regions, and then you have another sort of cluster of them that are in those lower enrollment areas, but having higher square footage. When you jump to middle schools, which we know there are a few like traditional middle schools within the district, they're significantly more space per student than any other school type. So in the handful that are there, they are really far above that line of 180 square feet per kid. And last but not least is high schools, where generally bigger buildings tends to be a broader scatter. And, you know, just knowing that more space is usually needed, but you can see this sort of line of Northwest schools falling in that region there, ranging from, you know, 175,000 square feet all the way up to almost 450. So hopefully that's helpful insight, at least something to think about. And again, all the information on that spreadsheet is there, and have the digital version as well. So with the small group work, as I said, I think it is generally a more fun activity today, and I know we're a small group, so if we want to work as one, I think that would be fine. But just a reminder on non-closure and everything else, and the norms and expectations, equity of voice. What we're doing for that breakout activity is we have this game board that we've created that looks just like this, and it's got an arrow across the bottom kind of scaling from importance. So what we've done is we've created like 20 game cards that all have a different facility consideration on them. We've done an activity similar to this at one of the early town halls. If you went to any of those, you might have done it, but it was a little more broad in the sense that it had, you know, non-facility related things in it, after school programming or specialty programming in general, or these sort of things. And we really wanted to focus on buildings today. So what we'd like you to do is try to think about, as we move into that sense of prioritization, you know, what are the most important pieces in an MPS school building, and what should be prioritized as we start to think about what we want our buildings to look like going down the road. So to kind of jump back to the top question is, what are the realistic goals that, you know, we should be thinking about for the district over the next 10 years? So if it's, you know, where do we want to see the district in 10 years from a building standpoint in a pragmatic sense, but also tied to some of those district initiatives and hopes, you know, goals for student outcomes. And then last but not least, we always want to make sure we give an opportunity to plug any ideas for policy changes. If you had a chance to look at the one pager ahead of time, one of the supplementary resources on there is the state statute about what MPS can and cannot do with its buildings, if it were ever to try to dispose of a building, and sort of the hamstringing that exists for all Class A districts in the state, which is just MPS. So, some of those rules are challenging for sure. And so as we think about all that, when we do that, we'll break out the game board here. I want to also invite you to, if you don't like the way we set it up in terms of like staying within the strict boundaries, if you think it should be 4 in each one or 2 or something different, like it's a suggestion. Don't feel hamstrung by our rules. But yeah, we can go ahead and jump in if we want to go to the back table maybe. Or we can all come around a new one. Does that make sense? Or is everybody get up? I'm sorry.
Keep it fair.
Everybody loses. So, yeah. We also have some blank cards and some Sharpies that we can give if you see items that are not listed that you think should be. Happy to add them. But I will give these to somebody else to check through, know them well.
You wanna start, I guess.
Yeah,
Just lay 'em out.
And those are blank for what?
so if you think of anything that's not noted
On
there,
here.
or if you see one that you think should be split into 2 things, or 2 that should be combined into 1. Again, there are very flexible boundaries on the rules.
This one
Want me to
is important.
No, I'm the same.
Bodies.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's important.
Appreciate that. No need to. my back.
Many of them have, it says STEM labs.
Well, that would be, Well-
Yeah, I guess flexible non-classroom learning.
well, a
space.
STEM lab would be
There
not
should be
a
one that,
non-classroom.
purpose-built,
Unique programming.
that one over there, I think, purpose-built specials classrooms
Oh,
too,
yeah.
is like science,
Okay.
STEM
yeah,
lab.
like a science lab, or as opposed to just like, oh, this was an English classroom last year, and this is
Right.
Let's get that
science.
ADA
Right,
accessible
right.
How do you
buildings.
build it?
Important is one under here. So
I'd say safe and secure campus is pretty important. That one's right here.
what
Yeah, it
about,
was interesting on that one graph you had where
Mhm,
weapons was at the bottom,
mhm.
but the bullying and everything else was at the very
Yeah, I
top.
would say like this. I also think I saw one, it was like natural light.
yeah, I think that's super.
Cause like so
Some of
many
them are
of
like
these
classrooms
lights,
with
yeah,
natural
like
Some of them are
so
like
many people
prisons,
just turn the
yeah.
lights off cause the kids
Yeah.
get headaches, kids. Um,
Yeah, there is a healthy amount of research too on the impact that natural light has on students, in the same way that I'm sure everybody's experienced to that
Yeah.
point.
I mean,
I think this is important. I think this is important, really important.
well, that kind of goes along with gym and PE spaces.
Yeah,
too.
and the outdoor one.
Yeah,
I think adequate sized kitchens, cause that's a big
Oops,
thing,
sorry.
is like, a lot of the feedback I get from students is like, when lunch was cooked, it was,
Oh,
even if it wasn't
cafeteria.
great, it was, but like the kid.
Oh, so they can-
Actually, being able to cook on site makes a big difference
Yeah,
than
just
And
the
you can
prepared, well, yeah, the prepared meals, cause they aren't always.
so is that addressing adequately sized kitchen space, or is it more about the meals themselves?
So the idea with that was meant to be like, is a kitchen large enough to support cooking on site? As opposed to a lot of times now,
Hot drop off.
right, you're having a delivery, we've got enough
Yeah,
room to
They,
keep stuff
they've
warm,
eliminated a lot of
or
the
zap it and sort
the
of dish
stoves
it
and
out.
all of
Yeah.
that. for the
This is
cooking outside.
important, really important in my school.
Yeah, Milwaukee School of Languages has a small cafeteria,
Mhm.
that's for sure.
I'm like, that's important.
Don't get you started, huh?
So yeah, and if you wanna throw stuff on the board and you can move it around, like
Appropriately
non-permanence is
sized
definitely a
building
thing,
allowing
so.
for efficient optimal use of space.
Did you say, can you put
Kind of
stuff on?
broad brush over a
Yeah.
lot of this.
Yeah. And I think like architecture too, cause like,
how a place looks.
Yeah, that was brought up.
Feel free to make a wish too. I mean, I think most of those schools are decent looking.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Yeah, go ahead. So the idea is that the idea how we set it up was like, these are tiers, right? So there's 7 tiers. This is the most important tier and then sort of grading back from that.
Okay, most important.
Oh,
So these,
So more
and
important
we
is on
saw
the right
these
side.
3 as being all the same, but if you want to sub-organize within that, you're
Mhm.
welcome to do so. However you best see fit.
I mean, I really, safety and security is really important to
Yeah.
me, so I feel like
think-
that should be.
healthy and well maintained.
Okay, where's our safety?
Mhm.
I
Top
really,
month,
Safe,
it's up to y'all.
secure campus.
We want to hear what y'all have to say. Yeah.
I mean, what, I guess, what do you, my
ADA.
question is, what do you, like, what exactly do you mean by safety and secure? Cause I think there's different levels to that.
That's, when I think of
Right.
safe and secure, that's a really good point, but I'm thinking like, okay, like a school that my children attend, there was a gun that was brought to school, right? And a loaded gun that was brought to school. So what are we doing about mitigating that? And it's not just in Milwaukee schools, can be anywhere, right?
but wouldn't that be like not?
No, I'm just placing,
And we
We
can
can
move,
move.
we can move.
Oh, you're good. I wouldn't-
Cause, I mean, just from, I think from the student perspective, I think kitchens is a huge thing, like the
Yeah,
food quality is like they,
Is
and a
really
lot of kids
big.
just don't eat
There's
as a result.
there's a lot of waste.
Yeah, in like,
There's a lot of
So like,
waste.
that may be there and that over here. What did you say?
Oh, on the cafeteria, you're just not getting proper nutrients.
yeah, and, or what they are, they go to the dollar store and get like,
The
Hot
non-nutrient-
Cheetos
the
and-
non- the non-nutrient stuff.
yeah.
no, yeah, no,
Your
we're
brain's
keep
going
that.
though.
And
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
this-
You,
I
One
mean,
could make
the
that.
safety is, I
I mean,
think,
yeah, we're talking about like the actual safety of the children,
Yeah.
right?
mhm.
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but there's
staff.
a lot of
It's
elements to
staff.
what you're
It's
bringing
staff.
up.
Well,
Yeah,
so
cause
you're
like even
saying-
that of like, that isn't, I mean, the safety measures is not consistent across all the schools, so
and
like
then
that,
he
so
even
some schools
said
feel like they're more
safe
like
than
going into
others.
a prison here
yeah, because of
versus
the-
like where some have more freedom of movement than
Mhm.
others, so like. I think that brings like that discussion into place
But
of
what
like
was the
There
stat?
needs
Do
to
we
be
have a
more
You said the stat-
uniform safety.
equitable
About-
systems.
But there was
procedures.
bullying and
Yes.
mental health.
Yeah.
The bullet-
concerns,
But
too.
in that,
Yeah,
yeah,
for
I would
sure.
say these are, the way we are trying to think about all of these cards, even with, to use kitchens as an easier
Yeah.
example, like
Mhm.
having a big kitchen is great. That doesn't necessarily mean there's gonna be scratch cooking happening on
Mhm.
site, but it would allow for, in the future, yeah, it's
Sure.
hard to build a kitchen where there isn't one already in a very full school. And
Right.
so with safe and secure campus, we're thinking about it from like the physical safety and security
Like locking
components.
doors and
Sure,
cameras.
yeah, and like,
Not
when-
like having social workers or psychologists.
right, not
Actually, I
about
think
the
this
people,
needs to
this is
go
meant to be
higher.
purely.
And
It's like
facility
support
focused,
staff.
Right,
So like they have
Okay.
pull-out spaces, they have like privates, cause like currently, like for
Can I
my school
switch
example.
these?
No,
No, yeah.
I would say put it
You think it a
there.
little higher?
I think it would,
Yeah, just
that
cause
is,
like having private spaces for them to have, you know, interaction with students is a big issue.
and when, yeah, you're thinking about, like, older schools tend to be
Yeah.
like classroom, 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 classroom. And very
Yeah.
few offices, they're all clustered sort of at the front of the building.
Mhm.
I kind of want this one.
And even
here.
like warm spaces, cause a lot of times,
If
you
it's
know, it's
80
very cold.
degrees
kind
in
of
the
a
building.
Yeah, but it's
Design.
only for like a month.
No, I'm telling you, when they switched the calendar,
Yeah,
I was like, great. When I think September was still hot, I don't
Oh, yeah.
think you guys understand how hot is hot.
It gets hot in the
Yeah.
classrooms, yeah, my kids come home
drenched in
listening,
sweat.
right?
Can this one and this one be switched? Healthy and well-maintained facility? I mean,
Yeah.
because these are both facility
The same
based.
things, yes, I agree.
Mhm.
Cause that's heat too, correct?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
HVAC would be also good heating systems, cause that's the other thing is sometimes in the winter.
It's cold.
It's cold.
Well,
it's not
cold
warm.
or like ungodly hot. I think flexible classroom spaces, just because like, you know, modern education is going is more project-based learning and like flexible kind of, so I think it's an important design feature to have.
The
I
trick of
almost
this
think
game
they
was
should
all of
go.
them are meant to be relatively.
Important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Making
Cannot
it
go
as hard
there.
as possible for y'all. Or at least an argument could be made for any one of them.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
You
But
think,
it's
you
like,
think this
thing is like with
is-
cafeteria though, is like it can be mitigated with schedule or something, like it's, I think at a high school level, you could have different,
Or even,
even in elementary. you could-
even when I look at Japan and they have just like salad bars, I'm like, even if they just did that,
Yeah,
I'm like, just cut out vegetables, protein, and be done with it, and some fruit and be done with it. Like, to me, it doesn't even have to be,
Ripe fruit, not.
well, yeah.
but like
a
the
lot of
size,
fruit
you can
cups.
deal with
Oh,
a
no,
small.
No, I'm
Sugar
saying
cafeteria in
strawberries,
different
bananas,
ways.
apples, like, so I don't know
But
if you
if
necessarily
you're
have to go back to.
sapping cafeteria staff. Our cafeteria staff has 7 lunches.
But I think, yeah, but I'm
Mhm.
saying like
So-
the size of the cafeteria. can
Yeah,
be
that's
done
the
in-
size.
Yeah,
So if the size, you don't have 7 lunches if you have a bigger cafeteria, I think.
yeah, but I'm thinking like if you had to like sacrifice something, I think like a scheduling thing, like I think that's an area I'd be willing to sacrifice of having more lunches than like some of this other, like having a better, I'd rather have better specialty classrooms than a cafeteria that's the right size, because then specialty classrooms, you can offer more programming.
Maybe we need the
Yeah.
natural light one.
And when you look at programming, that's going on throughout the day. When you're looking at a lunch, yeah, I know you said you have 7 lunch hours.
And
No,
like,
I said there's 7 lunch periods.
7
and
lunch
like,
periods.
so like, for example, our school librarian opens up the library at lunch, so kids can go up in there and eat their lunch and do stuff in the library as well,
Because the
so.
cafeteria is too crowded.
No, just
No,
as like
it's
an
a
alternative
flex- a
space, because not
flexible
everyone likes to be in the
space.
cafeteria, it's
Yeah,
loud.
giving
it's-
your
and it
students
gives-
options
Yeah.
to kind of move
Student
around
choice.
during
Yeah.
the time frame.
Gotcha.
And again, if you had like flex spaces, kids could go into those.
Yeah.
Instead of having a
Yeah,
bigger
think about,
cafeteria.
you know, now you're in a space with a teacher and you're able to have different types of discussions during that lunchtime.
Yeah, or
As a-
clubs or
Yeah,
chess. or,
exactly,
you know,
so-
like whatever.
Yeah, see, I don't even see, I would rather like put this there. I think that having natural light is really important.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
from like,
I get,
Yeah.
oh,
How do you
I mean,
help?
I think from my perspective, like, I travel to a lot of the buildings, like, are we really gonna like bust windows open or bust like brick walls open to get natural light? I don't know if that's really gonna happen. So I don't know how high on the priority list I would put that, because that would
Yeah.
be something that would be super expensive to do.
but if you're doing
Oh.
new build, you know, that is.
Or
a
put an extension
potential,
or,
Yeah, but
but.
And most of
but
the
that's-
new,
that's
most
expensive.
of the extensions are a lot of glass. and,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
for
They're
sure.
pricey.
But it's not gonna be the whole school.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Well, and if, you know, some of the part of the larger conversation too is if there are potentials for closures or mergers and you're looking at 2 school buildings or, you know, that are otherwise the same, and one has a
More
lot of
natural light.
windows and natural light, and one is a lot of darker, smaller
Mhm.
classrooms, like, that's kind of how we're, like, yes, new construction,
Yeah.
renovation, potential for closure merger, like, these are all, how would we think about these things? And
Like
maybe
what's
move
real.
this one.
Yeah,
Like
but
what is
understanding
real
that
gonna happen.
each situation could have different
Move
priorities.
this
too,
one
with that,
over a
so.
little bit.
I mean, I'm
Yeah, I
open
think
to this.
flexible
but-
non-classroom learning
yeah.
spaces is. a
Cause
little
this,
more
like,
important.
I don't know, this
That's
is
gonna
really
be hard to-
dependent of like
That's gonna be hard to
what the
change,
road
too.
it's on too, cause
Yeah.
like, for example,
Hard
like
to change
Madison's on a
streets.
busy street, so like,
Yeah.
it just isn't safe. Like, the side streets are all right, but like up front,
Well,
like,
that's the flexibility side of it,
Yeah.
you know, as the principal's looking at the busy side,
yeah,
we have to look at, you know, maybe drop off, pick off areas of non-busy side.
yeah. Just, I mean, from a student perspective, I think kitchens is a huge issue. Like
Now, if
that,
you're
just
talking-
like they.
If you're
that's-
talking K
in every
five, this
survey of
is important.
students, that's
Right,
brought up.
You know,
Yeah.
but if you're talking high
kitchen?
school,
Yeah.
middle schools, this isn't as important.
And if this
Yeah.
is one where you wanna split it into 2 and separate them with a, you can absolutely do that, like. So, and we know that some of them, other things that have come up, not to like plant seeds, for all what we heard, but like, performance/assembly spaces. Usually a larger priority for a high school than it is for an elementary school. But,
And that's where, you know, even the elementary schools can go and partner with the larger schools that have
Mhm.
larger auditoriums, so that you
Yeah.
bring more families into.
That builds
But how would
pathways.
they get there?
Exactly. How would, like, how
Get
do
a
they get to the
bus.
school?
Yeah, you can,
It's
you
an-
can plan it and have a bus take them.
Yeah, that's all planning, you know, between the
But
staff.
then that's
and-
costly. So if you already have it in your building,
Yeah.
I mean,
But-
I'm thinking like,
Yeah.
I think $200 a semester is a lot less than building the new, like,
And if they start
auditorium.
pushing people back into their neighborhood schools, then hopefully transportation is going down anyway.
And you get the
And then you
chance,
have more money to,
and you get a chance to see a school that's in your neighborhood and
Right.
maybe see some of the great
Isn't
things that
this
are
like-
going on in that building too.
Mhm.
It's almost like we're kind of advertising within,
Building community.
building community around MPS schools and what we're doing. To help parents understand that, you know, you may not have to put your kid on the bus or take them way over here. You got a great school right here, and this is what they're doing here. Give that teacher or principal the opportunity to talk about what's going on in that
Right.
building before the performance begins. You know,
Mhm.
this is what we do
It's
here,
true.
and blah, blah, blah.
because you think about North Division,
Mhm.
they have a huge stage and a huge auditorium and a huge field house and a swimming pool. And all
Mhm.
these things and it's, you know, underutilized.
Yeah, that's the thing is like, that's where I see like even the outdoor spaces, all that stuff is like, is it gonna be utilized if it's not
Right.
there? Like,
And-
that's a big challenge.
And you have Hopkins Lloyd right down the street that have ADA issues.
Mhm.
Why can't they go over to North Division, which doesn't have all that ADA
Yeah,
issues, and have their performances there,
Mhm.
or school programs there,
good idea.
how far is it?
blocks.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
then
I've
it's
even
not-
thought about that. with,
I
like,
think
the
this is important in
graduations,
the
'cause,
high
like,
school.
it takes away some of the culture of a school, like having your graduation, your auditorium. and,
Right.
Like,
In a high school, this is important. In an elementary school, not important.
no, I haven't said, I don't say
No, I
it's
mean,
like
I-
highly important. I think it's
I'll
a,
say
it's a
least.
feature, but I think it's a,
But there's a space, why don't you just,
Of,
why
like,
don't we move this
some-
over here?
No, I like, for a high school, I think this is important. I do,
Now, what, adequately sized performance space?
yes,
Did you write
Mhm.
high school in here?
Yeah,
Just want to make
yeah, I
sure.
agree with that.
but not for, and maybe even middle school. But a high school, that's important.
Mhm.
But I guess for overall, is it more
I wouldn't put
important
it
than all
that
these things?
high up, yeah, no, I like,
That's-
just like
that's
of how
hard.
much we actually
Is it
use
more
our
important?
auditorium.
If you're
it's-
thinking about all the
It
schools.
would be very, honestly, I'd have it. way
I would
back,
flip
like-
it, that's at your school, but at my
No,
school, they just had
Mm-mm.
hairspray.
I-
Cafeteria.
so, like,
And
Yeah,
Because
but
you
like,
also
that's
have
the
to
thing is
think,
like, that
how
it's not
often is this
equitable
being
across
used?
schools.
that's
Yeah,
the
I
other
like,
can't, I don't know how equitable it is across all schools. I mean, I can't speak for all schools, but I know at my school, our auditorium is used.
I would
a lot.
appreciate a bigger auditorium at Milwaukee School of
No, and
Languages,
I
because
would-
our German immersion
But
kids will go there
I would
for
love for it to be used more, but the
programs, too.
reality
I
is
think it
like,
should
we have
be
a giant
more over here.
auditorium that's used very little. Like,
Mm.
Oh, you have a,
yeah, like ours is used very, like, we do some performances, we do Black History program, we do grade level meetings every once in a while, but otherwise it's not like a huge
it's under,
community space.
in a
So
high.
like, I think if you were like a specific school that, I mean, I wish it was used more, but it just isn't.
Wouldn't it, because if this idea is really that schools are going to close, which makes my stomach hurt. You're like.
Put it in the bill.
Can I ask y'all more about the flexible, non-classroom learning spaces?
Like libraries.
Well,
breakout
so again, don't be stuck to how we thought about it. I just want to explain, like with the breakout area. So often with newer design schools, you'll see spaces that have been designed where you can pull 8 to 10 kids out of a classroom and do maybe a smaller lesson in the hallway or something, or in this sort of carve out space. So more like that. And I know that when we were walking some of the schools here, we would see a table in the hallway and you can't really walk by it. And then if the fire marshal shows up, they're gonna be upset.
Yeah.
And so like having those
That's an issue.
intentional sort of spaces
Mhm.
built
But
out.
I like that idea because I feel like we're talking about, we saw this statistic about kids talking about mental health and
Mhm.
bullying. What about like mindfulness spaces
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
like
rooms and-
calming rooms
yeah.
for like children that need like
Sensory.
low lights?
Autism,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I
I've
think
seen
those-
things
Even
like
for
that, and they're
religious stuff, like
amazing.
certain students.
Oh,
may
What
We
did
need-
it-
definitely thought,
what you
and like,
guys
so
do?
I don't mean to tell you that it's not important, that's not at all, it's more so just explaining like, cause
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and our thinking on this one is really public spaces, but that are available where you like, I'm gonna, have these kids pull out of this classroom for a little bit and get them moving and change it up a little bit, whereas like a support space where you have those sensory rooms, a calm
Oh,
down
so those
room,
are different
maybe,
costs.
yeah, so those are just to sort of draw the distinction between those two. But they can very much both be
So
important.
you're thinking adequate support space would be those calming rooms?
Yeah,
I would
so
say the
Yeah.
difference would be like a
Counseling,
door,
pull-out
is probably the
instruction.
easiest way to think
Okay.
about it, like a smaller space, right?
So this is door, no door?
Well, then, I mean, for
If you-
that, I would actually
Pretty
say,
much, yeah.
well, those are all the same level though, right?
Yeah, those
So
are all
these,
They are.
like, yeah, so
Yeah.
this
But
is
if
on,
this is no door, then. I
yeah,
think-
so I would say like, actually, this is higher up because I think,
Save the money.
Actually, I was at school down in Miami, and they had no doors on any of the classrooms,
Open classroom.
open classrooms, and like like he's saying, they would have
No.
spaces where kids would, you be in the classroom, you get instruction, and then you would go out to the hallway, and the hallways and convene as students, and then come back into the classroom to report out on the discussions that you had.
So not, no walls, it was just.
You
no
have
doors.
walls, you just had no
No
doors.
doors.
Were they walls that went all the way up to the ceiling, or were they more
It's
like?
like a room like this,
So
it's
they
like-
don't
Okay.
have
the doors,
They have-
there was no
They took the
doors.
doors off.
And you just go out to the
Okay.
hallway and they would have a space,
I think cultural.
yeah, where kids
We've
can
seen
just.
some open plan schools where there are,
The
Yeah.
closest model we have to that is probably Bradley Tech, so it's
Okay.
designed with classrooms, but these really
I've heard a lot of
open
people
areas
complain about that.
outside of them.
Yeah.
A lot of
Oh,
people-
about Bradley
Yeah,
Tech,
that-
people don't like that
a lot of
concept?
people
No.
complained yesterday
Yeah.
about that.
yeah, no,
Oh, yeah.
I don't like that at all.
What about,
Well, not a lot, two people, sorry.
Yeah, no, but I've
I mean, for
heard,
the
that's a
sake
big,
of-
that's been a,
When
That could be
When
a
Jackson,
behavior
when
thing.
Jackson is an open concept.
River Trail is an
River
open
Trail.
concept.
River Trail is an open
But those are
concept.
super open concept, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are.
Can I add 2 cents from way back over here? Keep trying to do that with you, but thinking about future-ready schools and future technology that we didn't have before when we created these types of schools when they didn't work. We have new benefits to our advantage. Also, key to making any of those types of spaces work, like what we were
That's
talking about
what I
earlier
want.
about windows, transparency in classrooms, is really getting upfront training about how that curriculum and programming should operate and putting the things in place to make it successful ahead of the
From doing
design and building.
Yeah, right. Learn how to do
It's
it.
not that you
gotta-
shouldn't do it
we
because
gotta
it
get
didn't
this
work
up there.
then, it's that you have to plan for it ahead
The signals in
staff
schools
and get
is
buy-in.
I would
atrocious.
say it's like,
Also,
Train.
the element of
Yeah,
flexibility.
no, it's
atrocious.
just,
Like if you
Yeah.
have an
just for
open
kids,
concept,
like,
you're
the
able to
Chromebooks
turn
get
it
bogged
into
down,
a focus
Or when
zone.
families try to come and
Yeah.
they can't log on. I go to a lot of schools, have no connection
don't
at
feel-
all.
Don't feel like you can't add a row if you wanna keep writing
Yeah.
more cards.
I mean, I'd say like if you
That
have
is
high school,
important.
like I think having like multiple pathways, so like you do have tech ed classes, but you also maybe have business classes. You have,
Yeah.
you know, like the art, so like I know there's
Are you
specialty.
thinking
pro-
about the,
Yeah, like some schools, you literally walk in the
I'm thinking
door.
this.
and you-
Like,
over
I know you,
here.
like there you have, but like the thing is like currently how we have it, we have like, there's like Bradley Tech for tech school or Obama for tech school, but like Madison doesn't have any like wood shop or like
Yeah.
like
Oh.
having those stuff at.
that's more
Spaces.
so what that's meant to be, right? Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be an entire CTE school.
Yeah,
But it could be having a space within there where maybe you
Yeah.
have an auto shop, or maybe you
yeah,
have
so I think,
a media production or a culinary program or
Exactly.
something.
Mhm.
yeah, so I think every high school should have like
Yeah.
different pathways and maybe, obviously
So you're saying
specialty of like a
that, put
Bradley
that
Tech.
there? Like high schools should have that. High school should have a bigger PE space, like I think that would go there too. So
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's,
support,
cause that gives
Alright.
kids a reason to come to school if they have like classes they wanna come to.
Well, and I thought I had a kind of with the adequately sized performance and assembly space, to me too, that if the school is more like arts focused too, like, to me, that would make sense to have like a bigger space
Mhm.
for performances, whether that's musical or theater or whatever, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you wanna broaden the definition of this to include that, like, again, there aren't hard and fast rules here.
No, that,
You want it where?
I'm just not saying gym or PE, I'm saying like CTE, tech ed, culinary.
Can we combine or you don't want us
Yeah.
combining?
CNA.
No,
Okay.
I don't not want you
Just for high
to
school
do
and
any.
middle school as well,
I-
so kids
I mean,
can
I don't know.
discover.
There's just
So you want-
pathways, like you
But it's
said,
also
middle
like-
school into high school.
We have so, I mean, things are so few middle school, so we, you know, like that's
We-
like.
They're on
it's like-
K
Well, that's part of the problem, yeah. You got.
Yeah,
that
so it's
K-8
like, do you
model
move to a
that
K eight
really
model or do you
doesn't
move to a different
support
model?
middle
Yeah.
school
Yeah,
curriculum.
yeah,
You
so,
know,
I don't know, how do you?
So do
deal with
you
that?
want this over here? Or like this? See, like that?
Do you see any school districts that have,
You said-
instead of trying to get like every school to be this certain school, that they have hubs? That may be.
You said we can even create another.
Okay,
Yeah,
like
no, I mean,
elementary
I think
schools
gym
might
and
fit
PE's
it,
for
like
both
this hub that
elementaries
has a
too, because like
science
if kids don't
lab
have a
or
place to
things
get
like
their
that.
outlets.
Where you have like schools that are focused on,
PLC.
or are you saying like
Or
they
just
would
like-
have a shared, like, okay, now it's our turn to go use the science lab, so we're gonna go over to this
Yeah.
building.
Yeah.
Within the building or?
Yeah, within the building.
But you're saying like, so in a scenario where, let's say there are four middle schools, and they all take turns
I think
going to
that's
a
huge.
different fifth building that has science lab, is that?
Yeah,
it's a
so one of the
thing.
schools, like Andrew Douglas,
Uh-huh.
like that, 9%.
Yep.
So you might build this like extravagant science lab in it.
Mhm.
And now schools can take field trips to that science lab and use it, instead of trying to like build one in each school. Like you can really like focus and like make it great.
I love that.
And then people just take turns using it.
Yeah, it's like a career exploration, or like you're saying, it can be embedded in the learning environment where, you may go there once a week
Right.
and take part, and the curriculum is the same for all of the schools that
Yeah.
come into.
And maybe some of the schools around it can walk to it, cause I was in Wauwatosa one week and they were just, I don't know where they were coming from, but it was a whole elementary school class and they were just walking and I don't know where their school was, but I was just like, yeah, people can take walking field trips and
Mhm.
all these other things instead of like,
So that's kind of the idea of, the whole kebab in one local area, like the large
yeah,
facility
like you have
model.
hubs.
So you have your like
Hub and
kindergarten, you have like your elementary school and your high school and your middle school all
Mhm.
kind of near each
Mhm.
other, so you
Yeah.
can do those walking field trips.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And then like the middle school can like share some of these high school facilities and
Mhm.
elementary school can do all that
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
They would
say
have to be
in
adequate.
terms of the building being
Equitable.
entirely specialized to a science lab or so, that's
Yeah,
where it gets
no,
tricky, is
right.
just because you also wanna think about the cost associated if that building is not occupied all the time, right?
Well,
right.
and
No, I
how
would
many-
think it would still be occupied.
Right, so as long
Yeah.
as, but
And then what other programming can you even add to that? I mean, as we're looking at
yeah.
CTE, career technical education, can there be a wing for that in the
Mhm,
same building? Because, I
mhm.
mean, if you look at the square footage there, it could probably house a few different programs.
Right,
Mhm.
If
And
you
And you
also-
got, and you got
Culinary
great parking over there
programs.
too, because I think you share that space with Keith Avenue School.
Mm.
So some of the parking things that we were talking about, adequate parking, that'll be addressed there too, so.
So just so I understand the concept, like one of the schools would have this special, but it wouldn't necessarily be for students to attend every day. That would be like a hub for all the kids in the region to go there?
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of think of it like what you're saying is like finance park. You know how
This
people show up
probably
to
should be
finance, I
higher.
don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
You don't have a
Coles
safe place to
Care
park your car.
has that thing for
Mhm.
fifth
Yeah,
graders
for
and eighth
staff
graders
and
to
folks,
attend
yeah.
and learn
Mhm.
about finances. Are you saying something like that for a school? Make a school like
Not a
J,
school. I mean, to be honest, my initial thought was that central office needs to be decimated and in a community hub created that includes rec, science labs, all these places that people can then take field trips to, but that's a whole nother thing. So.
Love it. We're here for outside the box
Encourage
thinking.
this thought here, only because we don't know what our limitations are yet financially, in reality. We're talking about a long-range plan that we need to garner support for. Thinking open-mindedly and big is a good thing, because we need to explore ways to shake things up at MPS to do something different than what we've done before. Maybe it's a flagship thing, maybe it's not. But the opportunities that we give ourselves when we allow ourselves to think beyond what we have now will create that synergy to come back down to the ideas that are realistic when we get hit with the financial aspects of it. I'm not saying that we don't need to be conscientious, but think about it this way. What if that idea starts running and some other ideas really start making sense about that, and it becomes a way to bring students in because it's a super sonified version of not only science and technology, but Project Lead the Way, Makers, it's almost like our own museum, our own Betty Brinn, you know? It's something that's constantly active and moving, and it's refeeding back into the rest of the schools, into the rest of the curriculum. So I want to encourage that type of thinking, because again, a lot of the times when the building programs that we try to design in the past fail, and this is with a lot of school districts, it's because of the time it takes to train staff and develop those ideas and build them into the curriculum. So people aren't operating on a cells and bells mindset, they're operating on the new way and forward thinking mindset, which is what will make that successful. So just my 2 cents, but I really think it's breaking that box open.
And I think adding to that really quickly,
Yeah.
there's also this idea of like multiple streams of income.
Well, partnerships, right?
Right, so there's partnerships, but there's also if you build spaces that can be rented,
Okay.
you know, for
Oh,
what,
and they
people
pay
are
for
always
themselves.
looking for rental spaces.
But can
I mean-
schools legally do that?
Yeah, you can rent a school.
You can rent
You
your
just have to
school.
go.
You can rent
There's a
your school.
process.
They just have to be a place where
You
people
gotta have
wanna
a-
rent it.
Yeah, you gotta have
Okay.
insurance and some other things that the district requires you
Fill
to
out a
have.
form.
Yeah.
Well, but I think partnership, cause like at Betty Brinn, they have to, there's certain displays, right, that are sponsored by people, right? So like, could you, if you wanna go to like tech, could you find a local, you know? I don't know, maybe,
Well, and I
right?
think this is where, I don't know if we're gonna talk about this later, but I think this is also where our foundation comes into play. Cause if you give them like, people need projects that they can get excited about, and then that's when they give you money,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? So if you say, this is what we wanna build, this is the capital project we wanna do. Now we are looking for people to give us money to it. People will give us money.
Or use what you have, and then people give you money, cause you can use what you have. You can use a space,
They're not
Like
gonna
you
be
have-
excited about it.
but you can use what you have, and people can give money to what you have. Cause
Yeah.
if you already have this space, or you already have
I
tech,
mean, to that, but
Use it.
yeah, to your point though, like if you, like I always think about that, if you're consolidating like a high school, for example, there's like history in that, whereas like if you have a new space, it's like, cause like, you know, it's gonna be like, you're coming into our space, if you,
Right.
like, okay.
And that's why certain
And
schools
whereas like if you
give
have
more
new,
support.
yeah, whereas like if you have a new space they're coming into, or a new, like,
Well, I look at
we have
Madison,
examples.
you know, you guys got a planetarium in your building.
yeah.
How often is that utilized?
Well, since COVID, never, but that's because it's a rec thing too, right? And so like I don't think it's been maintained.
But I mean,
since then.
if
But yeah,
there's
there used to be-
programming assigned
Yeah,
to,
there used to be
you
field
know,
trips.
where folks used to come into Madison High School, take part in this planetarium classroom. You
Mhm.
also have a jury room there.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, so our schools have
Yeah.
things in them, but are we creating programming to utilize those spaces that other schools could
Yeah.
come in?
So-
yeah,
So-
I mean, it gets to that appropriate
Yeah.
size,
Yeah.
because like kids talk
I've
about
been
that
to
all the
Madison
time.
a lot,
like,
I've never
right.
been there.
Yeah,
North
that's what I'm
Division has
saying.
a dental clinic.
Mhm.
Wait, who has
Wow.
a dental clinic?
Cause they're
North
medical, they
Division.
were in
Yeah,
medical school.
Obama has
Yeah.
cosmetology.
Yeah, I mean, and
Yes, I
we've
mean, we
had,
have CNA
we've
in
had
Madison.
good examples of like the Bartolotta's built out
you
Oh,
know, the culinary arts at Washington High School.
Washington High School, Bayview,
So,
Madison.
Madison.
so.
But you gotta
Vincent.
keep it funded, right?
Correct, correct, yeah,
That
so
could be
it, so it
expanded
takes,
too, like
takes a person and.
cafe, you know,
So it's
like
like
Mhm.
somebody needs to.
Yeah,
manage
just
that.
champion.
kids producing
Oh,
stuff
Inside
for
and
that,
outside.
right, like.
and
But
grow-
just
and
out
growing their
of
own food.
curiosity, I wanna ask y'all, like, it's, you know, things get moved around, let's put this one here or there. So just looking at it, does this look right to y'all? Is this, so and I wanna make sure I'm reading it correctly, because we're gonna take photos and we wanna look at these and start to try to understand your perspective, so just checking my understanding. So ADA, safe and secure campus, HVAC and thermal comfort, and internet and Wi-Fi, those are the most important.
Is
And
that
then-
for guests? Is that what you're saying, for guests?
For internet.
I think
Wi-Fi.
everyone, like,
But I mean staff too, like
Staff,
staff's
students,
in the
yes,
school and
because,
they
like,
can't use their phones.
kids, like
Okay,
sometimes the
yeah, 'cause we
Chromebooks
don't
start to
have
get,
our,
not work
we don't
well.
have our Wi-Fi available to guests.
Right.
Mhm.
That's why, so that's why, if you want that for students and, then I would write guest down there.
Okay.
Any MPS device, I can pretty much walk around the hallways.
Well,
Yeah,
but I'm saying, but for staff,
Staff is.
it's also for
yeah.
staff though.
Right, but not on your phone, because it's not an MPS device. So I would write.
No,
guest
but I'm
down.
saying if you don't have.
Wait, let's not write it. I don't.
If you don't have service though.
Yeah,
Can we, yeah, can we
Like,
not write
I know-
that?
there's a
like,
lot
I
of
know
dead zones
people-
all
Oh, yeah,
throughout Madison.
phones never work unless there's a fight.
So that's what I'm, so that's what I'm saying, that's why it's for staff too.
Yeah, and cell phones would be a little bit different, so cell phones,
Could we
don't
not write
run over the
guests?
internet.
But, well, you can do Wi-Fi calls though.
Okay,
Is it specifically
it would
about
be, yes,
mobile
you would
devices? Is
be yes
that the
on
idea?
Do you
Right.
want guests to use the internet and the Wi-Fi?
Yes.
yeah, cause like parents.
We
come
do
in and
family
need to do-
engagement.
Yeah,
I'm in the family engagement department. We're trying to get people to fill out surveys.
Couldn't
And
they
nobody
just
can
get a
like-
Wi-Fi password like we have right here?
They don't do
It does-
that.
they don't do that, yeah.
They
But
don't.
why-
It has to be turned on. at the
Yeah.
time.
And even
Oh, it
like,
has to
It's
be-
always turned
even like
on.
kids when they're doing like graduation stuff, so like FAFSA, they have to get into
Doesn't
their
that
personal
present a
email and they
legal
can't always get
problem?
into that,
If-
and
yeah.
so.
That's a legal issue if you write guests. They can have access to the internet and Wi-Fi every
it's-
time they walk.
it's a separate thing, I think, but yeah, they just don't turn it on at the.
I think we get the gist of the card
Okay.
though, in
Right.
terms of like, I don't wanna get too bogged down on
Yeah.
just
Okay.
Wi-Fi, so.
I
Understanding
think
the
it's
next
accessible.
one, PE, cafeteria. And so my assumption would be that those are separate and distinct spaces. Not a.
What, the
kappa
gym and the
gym,
cafe,
yeah.
well, some, I think.
Well, and I
are.
guess I'm asking
no.
in
I
this
guess they're
sense,
just-
like,
right.
with these cards, we separated them because we're thinking like, you have your gym, you have your cafeteria, that means you can have a PE class while the
During-
kids are eating.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
I don't know, I guess it depends on it, like in elementary, if it's at a size where
Depends on
you can do
enrollment.
that, like
Yeah.
do the transition,
And-
it's okay, but.
one of the
But
things
like a
that
high
we
school, yeah.
we're gonna put in our presentation too is just an older data point that is on the website, older in terms of, we brought it up a while back, but MPS actually has, I think, like 72% of MPS schools have both a gym and a cafeteria,
Nice.
which is really high compared to like a lot of the districts
Yeah.
we work with, especially in urban environments. So to have that is like a real strong offering, especially when you consider, you know, some of the other school types that are growing, when you think about charter schools that are in non-purpose-built spaces, or micro schools, or all these other sort of, you know, things, and this is something MPS really has to offer, so, yeah.
I can move it, I
Just
put.
to be a little.
I'm not trying to shake you,
Wi-Fi,
it's fine.
but I'm just making sure. I understand.
Wi-Fi, in 10 years, where do you guys think it's gonna be?
Gone.
Um,
Yeah.
We really don't know.
Not
I
gone.
think that
The
anymore.
question of whether it's-
Yeah, oh, I'm not, I have no idea,
It's still
So,
here,
I'm not
it's
gonna
probably
predict.
be even more,
but
probably more if it's free as breathing air.
And
It's
using
probably
the
not gonna
learning
be
environment.
Yeah.
the same.
Cause that's the thing, is teaching
But I
kids how to
don't-
use internet in a learning environment
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah,
That's a
it's
big
gonna be
thing.
different. It's not.
These facilities have to last the next 80 years once they're actually built.
Mhm.
So the question of whether we really need something right now is kind of
Yeah,
where our minds need to go a little further out.
So we've got healthy and well-maintained kitchens, support unique programming, okay? Do we all feel good about these ones? Pick up and drop off, natural light, adequate support spaces. Everybody feeling good about, and like,
Mhm.
please let us know if
Could
think
this
any
go
should-
over here? In that.
Well, I
over
will
here?
say, I mean, if everything is important, nothing is important.
Yeah.
That is
So, like, I
true.
don't think we're
No, I
quite
think-
there yet, but as we start to build out those first 3 rows, like, you know, we do wanna make sure we're understanding if there are.
I
What's
think
important?
energy efficient's more important than, just cause like cost, thinking of costs, like if you have to pay a lot of money to keep a building running, then like you're losing money that could go to other places. So
Yeah,
like having a more energy efficient buildings would be a big thing. So I'd put it actually, especially if we're getting warmer, so
Yeah,
your
yeah.
costs are gonna be higher in
Yeah.
2050.
Yeah, you talking about heating, lighting,
Yeah.
things of that nature.
yeah, and as we do this too, kind of going back to the first question on there. What would you like to see in 10 years? Like what would be whether that's sort of a general standard of certain offerings, like to say that all schools should have classrooms with natural light or something like that, like even if it's not something MPS is gonna knock out at 144 campuses in 10 years, but like where is the district moving to? That would be helpful. We know there's like a lot of ingredients here to
What-
consider, but
Whatever happened to that telepresence idea?
We still use
Remember
it.
that?
We still use it.
Telepresence is kind of like virtual,
Yeah,
Cool,
we're still
right?
using it.
we're
Yeah.
actually
To what
scanning.
degree? I mean,
I would
to that
say,
question,
I would
can
say,
that be heightened? Because as we talked about programming and getting kids to physical buildings, can the telepresence?
I think that the telepresence might, the challenge that we discovered with that is every high school is on a slightly different schedule,
Or-
off by minutes, which when you're trying to start the class and, you know, one class starts at 10 and the other one 10:05 and the other one 10:10, that I think was one of the challenges, but there are definitely, like South Division is doing it for a lot of their language, and so we actually are using it, I think, for some of the language-driven classes too, so.
Milwaukee School of Languages has ASL now, that's
Yeah.
telepresence,
Yeah,
right?
so we're
We have
using it,
Mhm.
and it's
And other
it's
things
expanding,
too.
but I'm gonna
Yeah.
say it's not, maybe not used to its full potential.
Okay.
But that is one thing that could cure scheduling.
Yes.
so if y'all feel good about it, great. We just wanted to make sure, you know,
Everybody.
talking, so it's really helpful, yeah. And I guess any final thoughts on policy or anything else?
Scheduling, why can't we? You know, I think the more we're in line, I think the more we'll be able to share and do more, but if we have different timeframes because of, I don't know who's setting the schedule, if it's the principals or whatever. I mean, to me, the programming piece should carry the most weight to make sure that everybody's in place when
Yeah.
the clock starts.
Right, yeah, because
So,
I think we still have schools on block schedule
Yeah, and even that, I
periods.
wouldn't, like, block schedule's so hard for the kids, like, it just.
Yeah.
it
there's
doesn't
block
work.
scheduling and then there's periods, so you'd have to, I agree, like, why? But I understand block scheduling is because of like teacher shortage and, or that's how it was explained to me. That there wasn't enough teachers to teach, therefore that's why they do block scheduling. But we have periods at our school, so I think that makes sense across the board. If there's telepresence, everybody be on the same schedule, that makes.
yeah, I mean, depending upon how things are programmed, everybody kind of needs to be,
But with
Could
block
feel greater
scheduling, couldn't it
maybe, you
be?
know, if it's more on the high school level, we're expecting that, I don't know. If
The yeah, I mean, the high schools, you know, I guess that's where you have your different periods and that versus elementaries are not.
Couldn't block scheduling be start at all, like every school start 10 o'clock this?
The thing is, like, you
Even
can
block
move certain
scheduling?
things, so like, we have to have a 30-minute ACP period, so you could put that in first period, second, third, or fourth. So like, we put it in first, and then Bradley Tech has it in fourth.
And what's
then our
ACP?
At home base.
academic career and planning.
Okay.
And so like, so then we would be off with Bradley Tech's schedule no matter what, or like.
But
so
she was talking about, but you guys use block scheduling or you don't?
We do use, but there's also other stuff that they have to put into
Yeah,
the,
ACP.
yeah, so like, that throws the schedule off, because you choose when you wanna put that in. Yeah, so that's the programmer.
So,
Well, in 10 to 15 years, are we not thinking that all this telepresence, is probably just gonna be an individualized AI program also?
that is true, like, geared towards the kids.
Yeah, right. So,
Well, like,
Start your apologize. Here we come.
No, it
No, really
does, that
appreciate
is
you guys.
something else.
putting so much thought into it, so.
But to make
Just to wrap up, the last few items we had were just, thinking about those, like, what sort of questions we wanna be asking the community. So, and I know we're getting into more of having those priority conversations and things to respond to. So, I think, an increase in engagement and really pushing on those, but if there are things specific to facilities that you don't feel like we've asked about, or that would be especially informative, the thing should be live right now. If it's not, I can toggle it on. So let me know. And then it's also in the May meeting survey, which we linked here. So the look ahead is just peer district strategies and trends, what other districts are doing to face some of the similar challenges that MPS has with declining enrollment, older building stock, things of that nature. And that is the QR code if you wanna fill out the meeting survey before you take off, but we will also email it out tomorrow morning, just as sort of a follow-up note. But yeah, would love to get y'all's feedback on what sort of questions would be most informative.
Sweet.
And thank you all so much for coming. I know, shifting from last week too, we did have someone who had come on the wrong day, and last Thursday was May 1st, so yeah, we'll try to make sure that everybody is very aware of all the dates and things, but yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Discussion.
Okay.